Anyway, let's get to our first big story. One of the biggest stories this week, obviously, Luigi Mangione, the 26-year-old man charged with the murder of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson. There's a lot of information out there about his online presence. Everyone's digging for clues. There's been stories about whether that means anything or not. I think the best story I read was about him being kind of a typical tech bro. If he hadn't shot this guy, he would have seemed relatively normal in his interests. What was your first reaction when you started hearing about this guy? He stopped communicating with friends and family about 6 months ago and really went offline. He was quite an active online person, like a lot of people his age in his sector, in the tech sector. I think he worked for TrueCar. I think he was a video game aficionado. He did have health issue over the last years on Reddit. He talked about this back problem he had and struggled with brain fog. John Herman wrote in New York Magazine, what's most striking about the Mangione's extensive online dossier is that had it been studied before the shooting took place, it wouldn't have raised much alarm. Very difficult to characterize. What do you talk about that first, and we'll talk about the reaction from people.
Well, okay. So first reaction is, in my opinion, and let me be arrogant here, I think the correct reaction is to feel sympathy for the family of this man who was murdered. And then what I immediately registered was everybody decided that they would use this event to speculate on what happened to confirm their current beliefs. So people immediately went to, this is justified because this is an uprising, or this is, the most shocking thing about this isn't about the murderer. I mean, that's a tragedy, because when you're a young high school valedictorian with an engineering and computer science degree and master's degree, respectively, from an Ivy League university, and you're handsome and in great shape, your life is over. That's a tragedy as well. But the reality is, any speculation around what was going through his head, you're just getting lost in the soup. We have no fucking idea. We don't know if he had a schizophrenic break. We don't know if he was a Ted Kaczynski-like character who was a genius but came off the rail. We don't know. And you know what? It doesn't really matter, in my opinion, as much. What matters, or the most interesting thing here, is how society has responded. And I can tell you how someone feels about this based on, with 70 or 80% accuracy, based on one thing. Can you afford, pretty easily, health insurance? Because here's some data. 60% of bankruptcies are related to medical debt. And the largest source of bankruptcy is medical debt. We pay $1,500 per person for pharmaceuticals versus $500 elsewhere, despite the fact that we manufacture and distribute them. We spend $13,000 a year on healthcare, despite the fact that everyone else pays $6,500 and we have lower health expectancies. People oftentimes compare healthcare to how I would describe San Francisco, expensive but bad in the U.S., or healthcare in the U.S. And you have essentially, again, going back to the prison system, when we have injected a for-profit motive where the largest lobbying groups in Washington aren't big tech, they aren't the defense industry, they are the healthcare industry, which spends $750 million. And what you end up with is, despite the fact that 70% of America supports price caps and universal healthcare, it doesn't happen.
Yeah, it's like gun control.
Because of the horrors, better known as our elected representatives, keep letting the pharmaceutical and the healthcare industrial complex maintain this mendacious fuckery duopoly of sugary, shitty food from the food industrial complex that gets you obese and then hands you over to the diabetes industrial complex, which has created regulatory capture and charges too much money to people to die slowly. Yeah. Everyone is obsessed with this guy. That's wrong. Everyone is angry at CEOs. These CEOs of these companies are doing what they're supposed to do. And the thought that they're all of a sudden going to re-examine their ethics,
right. No.
Don't hold your breath, folks. The people who are at fault here are voters who have failed to find elected representatives who have a backbone and start thinking about the tragedy of the commons that is healthcare in this country.
Yeah, but what was interesting too is, I think, this reaction, and I think it's borne out from what you're saying. It's snowballed since the police captured him too. This reaction to this young man, this very troubled young man. People have been writing fan fiction. Etsy is full of merchandise. They call him Robin Hoodie. There's been Spotify playlists and crypto coins. His lawyer told CNN he's gotten offers from members of the public to pay his legal fees. This is just such a snapshot of where people are. They just have sort of had it. I don't know what else to say. And then laughing or making fun or being less than empathetic to the murder victim is really terrible. But at the same time, that man isn't a person anymore. He's the insurance industry, right? That's what he represents.
Right.
And perhaps he is in some ways. So, just so you know, major insurance stocks, including UnitedHealthcare, have fallen more than 6% since their closing prices the day before the shooting. There may be some Wall Street anticipation of moves. There's some moves to UnitedHealthcare for, I don't know how, got a hold of pharmacies. They loaned them money and then in a usury way, and then took control of them. There's a bipartisan effort they should not be owning pharmacies. They should not be owning hospitals. They put people out of business. That's an astonishing thing I didn't know about. So talk about the justice of like giving this guy a lot of attention and, making him in kind of, as you said, this folk hero who's not a folk hero, sort of an unfortunate folk hero, and what's going to happen to the insurance industry.
Well, okay. So in my opinion, this all reverse engineers to the same place. And that is when a nation gets to this point of income inequality, you have a self-correction. And that's the good news. Income inequality always self-corrects. The bad news is that the means or the vehicles of self-correction are war, famine, or revolution. And I would argue this is a form of revolution. I believe the Me Too movements and the Black Lives Matter movements, which both had righteous components of them. But the thing all of these things have in common is the following. They're going after the 1%. And effectively what happens is people decide if the 1% is making more money than the bottom 99, at some point the bottom 99 figures out the best way to double their wealth is to either show up and kill these people, tell them to move out of the country, or to shame them. This is what has happened in Central America and nations all over the world throughout modern history. And this is a form of revolution. When people decide, when they see that insurance companies have a profit motive in denying claims, when they see insurance companies and their shareholders consistently getting richer, and they also know somebody whose wife got lung cancer, which meant they were going to be bankrupt 2 years later, they start to get enraged. This is a form of revolution and the support for this person.
Can I make a comparison, though? I love you because, look, this happens with the shootings. All the everyone in America wants gun control, except for a small, loud.
It's minority rule.
The tyranny of minority rule, right?
It's capture of our government by rich people, and this is what happens in democracies without stronger institutions. Is rich people who don't see themselves as bad people, and they usually aren't, say, let's vote for people that will put in place regulations and put in place subsidies that we get richer and richer and richer. And at some point, people wake up and go, you know what? I've had it. And they grab their torches. And this is a form of that. This is a form of revolution. And as long as we have elected representatives that continue to soak the bottom 90 or the bottom 99, I mean, do you realize how insane our healthcare system is right now?
It really is. Scott knows this. When part of being in San Francisco, my doctors were all there, and I had my annual everything. And there were a few things that needed special tests. And the struggle I had with the insurance company was insane. And the doctors just shrugged. They're like, this is how you get around. Literally, it was like, I felt like I was in Russia. Like, remember in the old days, this is how you get around and get the meat for your table, right? I was like, what in the world? This makes no sense. These are, and I'm sure there's abuse, of course, and they're trying to protect against abuse and people trying to trick them. But most people are just there to get tests, right? Like basic. It was so frustrating. I did not go out and kill someone.
Let me give you some examples here. A mother who's taking care of a child with childhood diabetes, and let's be honest, it's always a mom. She spends 5 months of her year handling that child's health care. And a lot of it is on the phone arguing with insurance companies who have a vested interest in making friction and difficulty in you getting your claims. How does she feel about this shooting? I'm not saying she's an evil person. And I was on Anderson Cooper last night. I've essentially become everyone's booty call. When someone cancels, they call me and say, bring him on.
Yeah.
And Anderson pointed out, he said, I know you canceled your health insurance 7 years ago. And I did. Why? Because health insurance, 45 cents on the dollar goes to profits and administration, meaning for every dollar you give to health insurance, you're going to get 55 cents in claims back. And their job is to make sure it's 54, then 53, and 52. And might they not make it more difficult for you or more reasons to cut your anesthesia early or decide you're outside of their coverage zone, whatever it might be? And so what I decided was at $50,000 a year, which was my insurance because I'm a narcissist and I want the gold-plated one. So I went naked. The last 7 years, I've saved $350,000 in health insurance premiums, which will buy a lot of health care. But again, this is the problem. And I want to be very clear. Give me a second here because I don't want anyone to interpret this incorrectly. I am not suggesting that lower and middle income people ever give up their health insurance. But the reason I can do it is because I am wealthy enough that I can absorb any health emergency. So this is yet another transfer of wealth from lower and middle income people who cannot take the risks I can take, and I can opt out of this usurious, ridiculously expensive regulatory capture infrastructure called the health insurance system. We need to take Medicare, it's at 65 now, lower the age limit every year, and essentially we need universal health care.
Medicare for all. It's just like
Medicare for all. And do it slowly. Do it slowly. Do it over 44 years until you get to 21, and then maybe go all the way down to 0. Mm-hmm. But something is wrong in Mudville. The profit motive injected here with Citizens United, where democracy is no longer about people voting, but about dollars voting, has led to a healthcare system where we are trading despair and anguish for shareholder value. And that's where we are in America, is the tail that wags every dog is shareholder value.